Euromaxx highlights in this edition. Top Hops, a northern German brewer gives beer a champagne touch. Art Attack, Portuguese artist Joana Vasconcelos incorporates crochet into her artwork. Modern City, Chemnitz in eastern Germany has reinvented itself since reunification. Euromaxx highlights. And here's your host, Karen Helmstedt.
Hi there, and welcome to our Highlights edition. Well, it was 20 years ago that Germany became a unified country once again, consigning 40 years of painful Cold War division to the history books. Such a dramatic political event triggered equally dramatic changes in many people's lives as new opportunities opened up on both sides of the inner German border. Well, we looked at 3 careers that were made possible by reunification.
Museum director Thomas Roth, fashion designer Sylvia Heise, and photographer Daniel Biskup. They're united by an historic event. All of their lives were fundamentally changed by the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and German reunification, which followed in 1990. West German history student Daniel Biskup documented the political and social changes taking place around him. Then he went on to make photography his career. Biskup has taken photos of Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, former Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and the Dalai Lama. German unity changed the focus of his life.
Durch die Wende
It enabled me to turn my main subject into my profession, my interest in Eastern Europe, history, the past and future. So the last 20 years have been very fascinating for me.
Biskup captured the transformation of Eastern Germany on film. After German reunification, he fulfilled his ambition to photograph in Eastern Europe.
If I had gone to Paris, I would have been the 100th or 1000th to do so. But in Eastern Europe, I discovered everything anew. What could be more intriguing for a photographer than to follow the transformation of society in the Soviet Union? The 2 coup attempts against Gorbachev in 1991 and against Yeltsin in 1993.
In the months between the fall of the wall and German reunification, Biskup traveled all over Eastern Germany. His photos are historic documents and have been published in book form. German unity changed his life. From a student and local journalist, he became a photographer of events that made history.
Looking back, I think German unity ultimately gave me the chance to make my hobby my profession, and my studies became a private pleasure. I never finished my degree, never wrote a master's thesis, but I don't mind that. I experienced history live, and I don't think a master's or doctoral thesis can top that.
Sylvia Heise has been designing women's fashion for 30 years. Here at her studio in Berlin's Friedrichshain district, she comes up with concepts for her collections. Feminine but comfortable and easy to combine with a variety of pieces. She regularly shows her collections at international fashion trade fairs. The designer's styles are in demand around the world. Her international success would have been impossible without reunification.
I remember how nice it was the first time I actually saw my name on clothes women were wearing. We didn't have that before. You were one designer of many, part of a collective.
In 1977, a 19-year-old Sylvia Heise started studying fashion at a renowned art school in East Berlin. Her final project design was featured in the East German fashion magazine Sibylle in 1983. After completing her studies, Heise worked as a designer for Exquisite, the only high-fashion brand in former communist East Germany. After the wall fell, Sylvia Heise could explore her creativity to the fullest. She took her designs and headed to Western Germany.
The first place I headed to was Hamburg, to specific boutiques, and then to Frankfurt. We basically just got in the car with the pieces from my first collection and started driving. We really made the rounds.
And the hard work paid off. In the last 20 years, Sylvia Heise's business has continued to grow, and she wins over new customers at every fair and fashion show. Sylvia designs about 70 pieces for each new collection, and they're available in more than 200 stores around the world. Her clothes are meant for confident women in their prime, like the designer herself. German reunification, she says, enabled her to realize her dream.
Our biggest success is that we've stayed consistent over the years and that we've grown and taken our place on the international stage.
Martin Roth is a cultural manager. For 9 years now, he's been Director General of the State Art Collections in Dresden. He's in charge of 12 world-famous museums. One of them is the Green Vault, one of the most magnificent treasure chambers in Europe. Another is the newly refurbished Albertinum, with paintings and sculptures of the past 2 centuries. Reunification was a major boost to Martin Roth's career.
I definitely benefited from reunification. At 35, I was director of a state museum. In West Germany, I would have had to wait until I was 55, which is how old I am today.
After completing his doctorate, Roth moved to West Berlin. Then, in 1991, he became director of the German Hygiene Museum in Dresden, a science museum focusing on human biology and health. But the building was in dire need of repair.
In the early 1990s, the museum was in a catastrophic state. This incredibly beautiful and very functional building had been left to rot and was in need of urgent attention. So much had been patched up in a makeshift manner. It was kind of a symbol of East Germany itself.
In 2001, Roth got his present job as Director General of the State Art Collections in Dresden. The fabulous collections he administers draw visitors from around the world. And reunification transformed more than just Roth's career.
Since reunification, I have learned so much about Germany's role in the world. I think I've become more German. That we lived to see the end of these power blocks in which brothers and sisters couldn't talk to each other, and that all happened without blood being shed, is amazing.
Cheers to that. Which brings us to yet another aspect of Germany's role, namely that it's very much a beer nation. And with some 1,300 breweries, it follows that there are thousands of types of beer to choose from. But one type that might not be readily available at the next corner pub is a special brew made in northern Germany. What makes it so special is a fermentation process involving champagne yeast instead of the traditional brewer's variety. Well, it makes for a ritzy-looking hybrid beer that boasts 7% alcohol and a whiff of bubbly.
Every bottle is individually numbered. Sylter Hopfen beer is sold in 3/4-liter sparkling wine bottles. The hops are cultivated in Germany's northwestern island of Sylt. The location is as exclusive as the product. Thomas Kipka is the man behind the Sylter Hopfen beverage. He was the first person to actually cultivate hops on the island of Sylt. Every week during the summer, Kipka visits his hops fields to check on the progress of the crop.
It has to be really quite yellow and ripe, and there has to be this wonderful aroma of hops, and then we can say it's time for harvest.
He set up his hop farm on Sylt in 2004. The mild sea climate, the good soil, and the unpolluted surroundings make Sylt the perfect place to cultivate hops, says Kipka.
The reason the hops are as low as they are here is because we've introduced a special Anglo-Saxon variety which is suited to the sea weather. We also have very strong winds here in Sylt. We sometimes have force 10 or 11 winds. And if you see the usual pictures of hop farms in the south of the country, you will see all these huge high fields. But we can't do that here because storms would tear them all down.
Once the hops have been picked, it's time to go back to Flensburg for the next stage. This is where the fruit of the plant, the umbel, is picked and then dried. The hops are put into the beer later at another brewery. Thomas Kipka is a little nervous. The seasoning for the beer, made according to his own recipe, has to be just right.
Sometimes we only get one shot at it. Since all our production is natural, every bottle is produced individually and has to then sit for a while, so we can't afford to make any mistakes.
The sparkling wine bottles are filled with the unusual beverage, a mix of beer, seasoning, and the special champagne yeast. Later, the boss checks personally if the yeast has settled in the neck of the bottle as it should. Similar to champagne production, the bottles are briefly opened after fermentation so that the yeast can spray out. Of course, all this work done by hand comes at a price. Each bottle costs almost 20 euros.
Na, wie läuft's? Gut.
All his customers, from delicatessen stores to beer connoisseurs from across Asia, the US and Europe, want fast service.
Our furthest customer is in Tokyo. It takes 4 days to send these bottles there after they've received their labels. 4 days to Tokyo.
And each bottle of Sylter Hopfen has already been sold before it was even made. Around 20,000 bottles a year roll off the production lines. Thomas Kipka can hardly keep up with demand. He's now planning to enlarge his hop farm, but he says he'll never resort to mass production. Each bottle of Sylter Hopfen is and will remain a special handmade edition.
Well, handmade is also a qualifier for much of the work of Joana Vasconcelos, and that's because the Portuguese sculptor specializes in crochet work. And even if crochet and sculpture don't really seem to go together, it's how she juxtaposes her handiwork with ideas that fascinates. Now, the raw materials she chooses to combine either complement each other or contrast very starkly, making for extraordinary installations. We spent a day with her at her studio in Lisbon.
Intricate crochet and lacework can transform any object into a work of art. Traditional Portuguese craftsmanship with a contemporary twist. Joana Vasconcelos is one of Portugal's leading artists. Her work is a fusion of the traditional and the modern, combining old-school craft with innovative new ideas.
There's a context which they exist, which is a traditional and a time and an era, and through my work, they get to live in a new context. And I try to transform them and putting them in a new perspective, because you can have something that's really kitsch or ugly, and you can transform it and it can become really beautiful and important.
Vasconcelos' work tends to be ambitious in its scale. This crocheted tablecloth is 30 meters wide. It took about 1,000 women almost 6 months to complete it. 2 years ago, it graced the Torre de Belém and turned one of Lisbon's best-known landmarks into a work of art. The artist likes to work with everyday objects. This heart-shaped sculpture is made entirely of plastic cutlery. These pots and pans are stacked high and turned into 3-meter-high stiletto heels. Last summer, a Turkish collector bought a pair for almost 600,000 euros.
The point is that my work makes sense out of Portugal, and that my work can exist in different countries and it makes sense to other cultures. That's what's important for me. The labels of being the most of this or the most of that or the most expensive or, the best, the price, none of that is my concern.
Vasconcelos employs 20 assistants in her studio. The team is made up of architects, engineers, painters, seamstresses, and art historians from all over the world.
When people come here and think they will do the same thing all the time, they won't. So here we can shift from very different materials to very different scales. We can work one by one, or we can work the whole team at the same time. It depends.
Accompanied by an assistant, Vasconcelos is on her way to buy material for her latest project. She finds what she's looking for in a supermarket.
I don't work with objects, I work with ideas. To work with objects is to do decoration. It's really simple. You just put things and it looks well. To work with ideas, it's completely different, because then you have to find the right objects to go with your idea. That's what we're doing.
Vasconcelos had her first solo exhibition in Portugal 10 years ago. Now her work is shown all over Europe. Her current project is an old car that's been souped up with toy guns on the outside and toys inside, a symbol of how a child sees the outside world from its bedroom.
To be able to show in different countries, to different cultures, in different, environments like museums or galleries or, biennales or art fairs. There's so many places where you can show. It's so diverse that normally you think, oh, I've done it all. And then there's always something else that you haven't done. That's what's so fascinating about being an artist. You don't really know your future. You have to discover it.
Anyone who wants to step into the world of Joana Vasconcelos can check it out between now and October, either in Lisbon or in Paris.
Well, now to a city that's seen more than its share of name changes. Back in the early days of communist East Germany, the city of Chemnitz, not far from the Czech border in the state of Saxony, was renamed Karl-Marx-Stadt in honor of the man whose ideas formed much of the basis of modern communism. But when the Berlin Wall did come down, the locals quickly voted to change the name back to the original, though Marx himself was allowed to stay as a reminder of different ideological times.
The Karl Marx Monument is still one of Chemnitz's main landmarks, even though the city changed its name 20 years ago. Today, Chemnitz is a city that's still in flux. That suits 33-year-old curator Thomas Bauer-Friedrich. He moved here 6 years ago.
As a young person, it was obviously very exciting to arrive somewhere where things weren't established and rigid. It felt like a place that could still be shaped and structured. In this city, you can really do that because of its past and history. So much was destroyed and damaged in the 20th century. It's not like that in the two other cities of Leipzig and Dresden, which are cities with centuries of tradition. Here you can just get into it and start doing things. And it still has very much an atmosphere of change.
The traces of communism are still visible in Chemnitz. The city was almost completely destroyed during the Second World War. The East German leadership had the city rebuilt, concentrating on housing and leaving many areas as wasteland. But in the post-reunification years, Chemnitz was given a brand new city center designed by a team of internationally renowned architects such as Hans Kohlhoff, who designed the Red Tower shopping mall. There was no shortage of space to work with. But not everything in Chemnitz is brand new. The Kassberg Hill, one of the largest intact concentrations of Art Nouveau buildings in Germany and a thriving sought-after residential neighborhood, was and still is home mainly to artists and intellectuals.
Traditionally, Chemnitz is a working-class town, but oddly enough, it's also one of the best-off towns in the former East Germany. In terms of per capita income and employment rates, it's faring better than Dresden and Leipzig.
Chemnitz is also home to some impressive tourist attractions. Theaterplatz, with its St. Petri Church, Opera House, and Art Museum, survived the war unscathed. The city's art collections include works by the Chemnitz-born expressionist painter Karl Schmidt-Rottluff, as well as Georg Baselitz. The city is also a must for fans of the Neue Sachlichkeit style, or New Objectivity. The Gunzenhauser Museum displays works by Otto Dix, donated by a Munich gallery owner who decided that Chemnitz was a perfect place to exhibit his collection. In Chemnitz, art has traditionally been sponsored by local industrialists. The city's history is inextricably linked to industry. First the textiles industry and later mechanical and plant engineering. The 20th century saw Chemnitz become a major center of car manufacturing. Even today, the automobile industry continues to be one of the region's biggest employers. But this isn't necessarily a city where residents live to work.
On the one hand, it's a big city with all its contradictions, upheavals, and tensions. And on the other hand, it doesn't have the hectic atmosphere of a big city. After a busy day, this is still a city you can relax in.
For the time being, Thomas Bauer-Friedrich has found the place where he wants to be. Chemnitz, the city of modernity, as it likes to be known.
And finally, Anselm Reyle is one of Germany's most successful abstract artists. He loves to use glitzy and trashy materials in his work, and with the help of a small army of assistants here in Berlin, he produces a startling number of paintings. But anyone keen to get their hands on one will doubtless be interested in his latest project, which puts a whole series of real Reyles on the street for a French manufacturer.
Skateboard or work of art? Whatever it is, it would be equally at home in a museum or on the street. It was decorated by Berlin-based artist Anselm Reyle. He's painted more than 50 skateboards, and each is one of a kind. The price tag, a cool €5,500.
I thought it'd be more scratched up than it is. It's held well. That's a sign of high quality. I've gone over it with car paint twice. But I think it even looks better than it did before. It matches well with what I scribbled on it.
French skateboard maker Mechanism regularly commissions artists to create designs for its boards. Danish artist Olafur Eliasson has also turned skateboards into works of art, as has German artist Albert Oehlen.
I was interested by the range on offer. I wanted to paint, but on a skateboard rather than on canvas. And then I wanted to put the wheels back on so you could ride it again, which would create signs of wear, so it would be a functional painted skateboard.
Anselm Reyle's studio in Berlin. Up to 30 assistants and other employees work here in a 2,000 square meter space. The company has its own development department, picture framing workshop, shipping staff, and photographer studio. The artist himself can usually be found in his office.
At some point, I was asked to create some exhibition pieces. I didn't want to turn the work down, but I realized that on my own it would take too long. So I took some people on. I stumbled into a way of working that developed into a business. For me, it's always felt like we're pretending to be a real company. That's why this office is so appropriate. It's like a parody of a boss's office with an enormous desk.
Anselm's company makes art, and very successfully at that. His stripe pictures, one of his trademarks, were auctioned in October 2007 for 5 times the amount of their estimated value. Everyday objects like hay carts and neon tubes are recurring themes in his work.
I've noticed that it suits me much better to have ideas and then discuss them with other people before developing them. I also discuss the results with other people. It creates another impetus for my work than operating alone. This way of working suits me much better.
Anselm Reyle's latest project involves painting by numbers. The technique was designed for children. He has elevated the form into high art. It's almost as if he's questioning the concept of art itself. His assistants produce the pictures to Reyle's exact instructions. Like in your average medium-sized firm, the workers break for lunch precisely at 1 p.m. The company employs 2 cooks to prepare the midday meals.
We've been eating together for the past 3 years. It's really changed things in the studio. It promotes a community feeling. People who work in different areas and wouldn't usually see each other come together around a table, and I join them. It's really changed the atmosphere here.
Despite the contributions of his numerous assistants and employees, each work of art is a genuine Reyle. The artist puts his personal stamp on all his pieces. This one, for example, will sell for around 85,000 euros.
Tja. Well, that's all for this week's Highlights edition. So until next time, alles Gute, tschüss and bye-bye.